Hi, I'm Alexandra, and I did my presentation on how immunodeficiency viruses have evolved and are evolving in primates. So, the human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV and AIDS, is existed for a long time in simians, or as the simian immunodeficiency virus. The simians, as in monkeys and chimps, certain ones specifically. Humans didn't have it because there was a mutation on that disrupted the protein binding sites, and this sort of carried on until around 1908, when poachers for the bushmeat trade in and around Congo and Cameroon, when they would butcher the apes and the chimps, the blood would either get into their mouths or in the cuts they had on their hand, and that was around the time that it sort of started to spread, and it went from Cameroon area to what's now called the city of Kinshasa, and that was sort of the place where it branched out even more. Um, the way they tried to treat it was not. They didn't really know anything about it. They didn't barely knew that it existed. So anything they were doing to try it just sort of made it worse. And because nobody knew that it existed, they couldn't. Up until that point, they couldn't try and prevent it at all. There's a video here that sort of explains a little bit more about that.
Scientists agree that the reason why SIV made the leap into humans, what's called a spillover, is because we had a taste for bushmeat or wild game. In this case, monkeys and chimps. This is known as the cut hunter hypothesis. In the course of butchering a chimpanzee, some SIV-infected chimp blood enters a small cut on the hunter's hand, or a bit of blood splatters in their mouth. The virus is close enough to human biology to infect the hunter, and over time, if the hunter passes the virus along to enough people, it evolves into the HIV we know today. Spillovers like these happen many times. We can tell because the virus mutates quickly, and by looking at the genetic differences, we can identify multiple lineages of the virus, each one corresponding to a spillover. We've traced the current epidemic to just one of these, called N for Maine. By analyzing chimpanzee pee and poop, researchers think the chimps who passed that version of the virus to us lived in southwestern Cameroon in the forests near the Congo. And based on the oldest blood samples we can find that we now know have HIV in them, which are from 1959 and 1960, scientists estimate that HIV-1 first infected humans around 1908. If that seems like a long time ago, well, it takes a while for a virus to take off. By the 1920s, it's thought that the virus traveled downriver, in a person of course, to the burgeoning city of Kinshasa, then known as the Belgian colonial city of Leopoldville. There weren't many women around other than prostitutes, so experts think HIV spread that way, possibly through injectable drugs the colonists used to treat some tropical and venereal diseases. This was before disposable syringes, and nurses were trying to treat lots of people with just a few of them, so the syringes may have only been rinsed with alcohol before being used on the next patient. So the very methods meant to stop the spread of disease may have actually been encouraging it. With time, infected people in Kinshasa left to go to other places, and they did the unavoidable. They brought the virus with them.
So HIV affects a few different species, a few different types of primates, in monkeys and humans, but it affects all of them slightly differently. There's several types of monkeys that will contract HIV, but it won't develop into AIDS. Sooty mangabes, and chimps, for example, will have the HIV virus inside them, and then they can pass it, but they won't develop AIDS. And it's when they pass it on to humans and rhesus macaques, and it's us that will get the virus, and it will also develop into AIDS. A lot of it has to do with dendritic cells, which produce in sooty mangabes a lot less of something called interferon alpha, which is like an alarm for them. So it's not even for the immune system. It's not even activated in the simian immunodeficiency virus, but in humans and the rhesus macaques, it's readily activated, and that's what makes your immune system is like in hyperdrive. It's active constantly all the time, and that is part of the problem. And if they need to figure out like the repetition of the virus, so it means that your immune system you're constantly working. It's the fact that the virus keeps replicating itself. If they can find a way to treat that and to steer away to get your immune system to stop doing that, your body could focus on just the normal things that it had to do instead of trying to fight off that one specific virus all the time. Um, there's certain treatments that they have if they can catch it early enough that will sort of work, but it hides in the body so well, where it hides in a certain spot in your body and it's really, really hard to see. So by the time that anybody notices that they have it, they've already had it for years and it's almost too late to really do anything about it. So even back in the 1900s and the 1920s, like they were talking about, by the time they realized anything was happening, anything was going on, it had already spread and the damage had been done. But they did start to eventually notice consistencies, and they thought it was just gay men that were contracting it, but they realized no, it's any demographic can start showing the symptoms, any demographic can get this disease. They realized also that it had spread likely through your blood and other bodily fluids, except for saliva. Your saliva, it doesn't take with it's other like blood and vaginal fluid and things like that. So it's not just gay sex. Straight sex, helping medical emergencies, can spread that way as well. There's a man named Montaigne. He was the first one to suspect that all these cases were to do with a virus. He's the first one that suspected it was a virus. And then he submitted his studies and his research, and other people after him as well. And one after another, they started finding more retroviruses within and to do with this one virus. They eventually realized, okay, we need to do something about this, and they were just like, what can we throw at the problem to see if it will work? And they started using this drug called Sermin. Didn't really work. It wasn't totally ineffective, but it was not it. So they started using azithromycin, which works really well, but it has awful side effects. So it does work, but it's definitely not an ideal solution. The virus also mutates so quickly that anytime they thought they had something that would work, that could treat it, that could possibly cure it, by the time it was able to be administered, the virus had mutated and changed again, and so the treatment was no longer effective. They realized that if they can figure out a way to make something that will attack it at different points in its life cycle, that would be the way to go, the way to eventually find a cure, to stop it from mutating or to catch it before it gets to that point. So they started looking at protease inhibitors and something called antiretroviral therapy, which is now the standard treatment. And they realized also that treatment and prevention is the best way to keep a handle on it. So of course, not contracting it in the first place is the way to go, and their ultimate goal is to eradicate it completely, so that nobody ever contracts it. But if they catch it early enough and they start to treatment early enough, it can be managed. There's a daily pill that exists and it works, but it's complicated. It's the sort of thing that has to be taken at the same time every single day, no matter what. Or because even if one day is missed, the virus, again, going back to because it mutates so quickly, it can snowball, and that one missed dose can render it ineffective. This video talks a bit about that as well.
Looking at a bunch of different strategies. One thing that they've tried is giving antiretrovirals extremely early on. This sometimes works for patients for many years, even a decade or more, but many people relapse and have to go back to taking medication. It would also be great if we could get the immune system to attack HIV and do the work the antiretrovirals do now. The problem is, HIV is very good at hiding. The virus stays hidden in cells called latent reservoirs, and it doesn't try to replicate in those cells, which means antiretrovirals have no effect. So even though the virus isn't causing any harm, it's still there, and it could become reactivated at any time. One possible way around this is to deploy CRISPR, the gene editing tool, to change the person's CCR5 proteins. The virus wouldn't be able to infect new cells, so even if it reactivated, it wouldn't be able to spread. The other main approach is to find a way to reactivate the HIV that's hiding and take care of it either with drugs or with the immune system, something scientists are calling the shock and kill strategy. At the very least, researchers are hoping to develop these methods into functional cures, but if they got every last virus, they could also be sterilizing cures. The ultimate goal would be to eradicate HIV completely, but after more than 3 decades of trying, we still don't have a vaccine. There are some promising leads, but it's been difficult because the virus mutates
so rapidly, and it's hard to make one vaccine work against all the slightly different viruses out there. So we've come a long way, but there's plenty of work left to do.
So again, with the finding a cure, there's lots of things that they've tried over the years, and so far 2 people in the world have been considered cured of HIV and AIDS. And the first was a man named Timothy Brown. And at first he was on azithromycin, and then he went on the protease inhibitor. And he had leukemia, he had cancer. So what they eventually did, he went and got a bone marrow transplant, which seemed at first to work. It seemed like he was healthy again, but it sort of backtracked, and he had to go through a lot of different surgeries and he had a lot of health problems and had to go through a lot of therapy, and eventually he got another bone marrow transplant. And so far since then, he's considered cured. They can't find, regular tests, they find no HIV in his body. It's still possible that it's in there, but he hasn't had it for so long. He hasn't had any symptoms and showing no signs of it for so long. He's considered cured. And there was another man named Adam Castellejo, and he had been on medication for HIV for around 9 years. And then he also had cancer, and he also went a bone marrow transplant. All in all, he went through a lot less trauma than Brown did. Of course, still an awful time, but they seemed to pick up on it quicker. Like, it seemed a bit of a faster process for him to get to the same point that Brown got. But again, he also had cancer, and he also got that bone marrow transplant, and he has been HIV and symptom-free appearing for years now, so he's also considered cured. The problems with considering that there's a cure for HIV, even if there was something like a pill or a treatment they found, it would be a really long time before anything would be affordable and effective for the general public. Just like for all of the people that have and will contract HIV. There are people who get it are also susceptible to other diseases, like Sir Freddie Mercury. He died of AIDS-related pneumonia in 1991, and if it's possible, all the technology today, all the stuff that we've discovered, he might have lived a lot longer if he had been able to go on the protease inhibitors and the azithromycin. But both of the men who were cured, they both had cancer, and they both got bone marrow transplants. And with bone marrow transplants, you need donors. So they're considered cured, and as incredible as that is, it's not really considered that there's a cure, because it's just not practical to say that when not everybody that has HIV has cancer. If eventually they do find an official treatment, whether it's a pill or anything like that it could take tens of thousands of years before it would stop working because of all the time it took to get to this point. If they could find something effective, it would take for a long time before the virus could catch up once again. So that's one of the main goals right now, is to figure something like that out. There is also, however, the possibility that there's more stuff about the virus that we haven't discovered, and that there's even bigger problems right around the corner. But you know what? The 2 people that have been cured, 2 is better than 0. 2 is better than 0. So any progress is good progress, and as long as people keep studying this and keep our knowledge of it keeps evolving, and we can figure it out, if the scientists, they can all figure it out eventually, hopefully in the future, there will be no more HIV and AIDS.